Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today's a Q&A with some really productive people. Our topic is cultivating deep work. Our wonderful participants have watched the podcasts of that name, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. But first, a quick summary before we go into our Q&A. Cultivating Deep Work is a series of 3 podcasts on the theme of modern life and work, and explores the challenges of productivity, distraction, prioritisation, deep work, and how we can use work for flourishing. Podcast 1 focuses on productivity and the curse of busyness. It explores the alleged time famine, alleged because it turns out we're not working longer hours than our forebears, but we are more distracted by an infinite diet of digital offerings and other modern life opportunities. As a consequence, we have a continuous fear of missing out, or FOMO. We fill our work and personal hours with relentless activity, much of it inconsequential scrolling through social media. But all this anxiety about a time shortage begs important questions, such as, what am I trying to produce and why? And what am I attending to? And this leads naturally to further questions, such as, am I doing my best work with the available time? Am I focused when I work? Am I happy with what I'm spending my time on? And am I resting enough to recharge myself? The answers to these questions for most of us are too often no. And this sense of dissatisfaction is consequential and has been linked to a lowering of average happiness despite rising living standards, and it's implicated in rising rates of mental illness. So podcast 2 examines some strategies to cultivate deep work. A major antidote to this sense of time famine is to substantially reduce distractions. Without sustained attention, without focus, we cannot do what counts most. Key strategies to help are to limit alleged multitasking and reduce external distractions such as notifications, phones, other people, and so on, and to collectively discuss ways we can all protect each other's precious attention. The second suggestion is to slow down and do less things, but do them deeper. It's about rigorous prioritising, so you spend more and more time doing what's really important to you. Time is finite, and therefore we should be doing less things of higher importance and of deeper quality, and we should be doing them first. Ideas discussed in the podcast include time blocking, providing undistracted blocks of time for deep work, and multiple put-downs, concentrated 20-minute bursts repeated across the day when we focus only on one thing and then put it down and give ourselves mental breaks. Well, that's probably enough as a summary. And as promised, we're going to go to our Q&A with my highly productive friends. Welcome, everyone. And as always, at this point in the Q&As, I hand over to you for your insightful and frequently challenging questions. Who wants to kick off, given that sort of challenge in itself?
I'll go.
Fantastic.
You know, starting with your introduction, why do you feel more productive when you're doing more things? I think that's a real challenge for me. I feel like at the end of the day, if I've done 50 things, I feel like I've accomplished a lot, but really I've only touched on, I've only scratched the surface.
Yes, I understand. And this is really like, it's like the perfect question to start our conversation, because this is a really widespread experience that people feel like at the end of the day, they can kind of feel good about themselves if they've done lots of things, right? And so we need to make some distinctions here. I'm all for people working hard if they're working hard on things that are important to them, and if they feel like they are ticking off their priorities. So that type of busyness throughout the day, I'm all for. Okay. Where it's a problem is where the busyness itself is what people have become sort of accustomed to, right, or habituated to. I'll give you some examples. So in my corporate consulting, often dealing with very high-performing people, what can happen is they become very uncomfortable, for example, when they don't have enough work to do. So they might become quite anxious, and they often report things like they have trouble relaxing on holidays. So what can happen is that being constantly distracted by work, in that sense, becomes a substitute for really focusing on the things that are most important. So in other words, what takes its place is being busy rather than, and it serves this function of, or at least I've been busy today, right? And it's actually being busy is not the goal. The goal is being engaged in stuff that's really valuable and important. So it's a hard question to answer though, because then you've got to distinguish, well, was I busy today on the priorities or was I just busy, right? But being busy for its own sake is very counterproductive. And just say one other thing that's just been rattling around in the back of my brain as I've been talking. Do you guys have that experience when you're talking and there's so this is alleged multitasking and it's uncomfortable, you know. I think that what's been rattling around the back of my brain is also what I call having a strong mind. And it's sort of the opposite of what most people would come to people's minds when I use that phrase. I often say a strong mind is an empty mind. And so what do I mean by that? It is that when very busy people who aren't, for example, experienced meditators try meditation, they find it extremely difficult. It's just sitting still, and when things quieten down, they really are uncomfortable, don't like that sensation of not having diverting stimuli to take their attention. And but when people do quieten down a little, they report interesting things, that their senses become more alert. You know, like if you give some, you know, a common thing is that you give someone like a raisin or something to eat and they taste it more. Or if they listen to music, they hear more in it. Or if they're in nature, they see more. Or if they're listening to another person, they're more attentive. And the reason is, I think, their brain is not attempting to do multiple things. It's quietened down. Now it's bringing all its resources to bear on this one thing. And so this single focused attention is what I think is a strong mind, not a mind that's sort of juggling 15 things at once, right? And it's not to say we should never do that, but I think we ought to be modulating between that and this more focused attention on fewer things but going deeper, right? Now, if your job description is about handling 500 things a day, then juggle away. But still, I would suggest that sort of activity needs to be balanced by quietening the system down. Have I come any way to answering your question, Colleen?
Absolutely. You've reinforced everything. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Phew. Okay, who's next?
I'll go next.
Yeah.
So we can go girl, boy, girl, boy.
Okay, let's try that.
So I come at this a little bit different.
That's hardly surprising, Terry.
Yes, true. So I I have a list of things I have to do during the day,
Yes.
which you
Yes.
would call important. And then I have a
Yep.
list of things that I want to do, that I
Yes.
enjoy doing, that maybe are less important. And then
Yes.
I have a third element, which is all these Zoom calls that happen,
Yeah.
where I try not to do either of those other two and actually
Yes.
focus on the conversation that's basically happening.
As we're doing right now.
Yeah, but when I'm on company Zoom calls, I can tell you 90% of the people are busy doing something else in the background and they're
Yeah.
not paying attention. So they're not really hearing the nuances of the information
Yes.
that's being shared.
Yeah.
But I always struggle with the stuff I have to do versus the stuff that I want to do.
Yeah. It's really tricky. Yeah. So you may be familiar with a thing called the prioritization matrix. This idea of distinguishing between importance and urgency, and there are 4 quadrants, and quadrant 2 is the most important quadrant. It's the stuff that's both important but not yet urgent, right? So the idea is that we should be spending as much time as possible in that quadrant. And then, of course, we have to do things that are in quadrant 1, the things that are urgent and important, right? So when you're making your list, there are the things you have to do, and they're important, and you've got to do them today. So they're quadrant 1, right? But Stephen Covey, who developed this thing, said that what's really important is in quadrant 2 is not just the things that have to be done that are urgent, because that's just management by crisis, right? What needs to go in quadrant 2 is things that stimulate us, that generate our well-being, that we like doing, but that are also, these things are important, like spending time with the kids, or exercising, or whatever it is you like to do. So, trying to find that discipline to also be doing those things that you like doing. The fact that you like doing them, in my view, lifts their importance.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I never allow anything in the quadrant 1 bucket to be have to be done the day that I write it down.
Yeah.
So I actually do avoid that. But there's always a struggle
Yeah.
between the stuff that I like doing
And the
then
stuff
the
that
things that come with my job role that I have to do.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah.
So,
And this is true, and it's true for employees as well, right? Like, they'll have their own priorities, but their boss wants them to do something. Guess what? That suddenly became important, even though it may not be what they want to do, right? So,
never happens.
yeah, that's right. So, I think the point here is that this is never finally, and simply solved. It's always a work in progress. It's always this sort of decision making. So I think that being conscious of this dilemma is an important thing, and saying, how am I going to spend my time in the next hour or the next 2 hours?
Yeah, because kind of to Colleen's point, if I don't do the stuff that I like to do during the day,
Yeah,
I'm away not feeling fulfilled. Even if
correct.
I get everything in that I have to do done, I
Yes,
still didn't do the stuff that really stimulates me.
exactly. And like, this is almost like a modern mantra, where people get to the end of the day and they don't feel like they've done the stuff that really fulfills them or builds their spirit.
Yep.
And so, and in Stephen Covey's terms, that's a mistake, because it's quadrant 2 where stuff's important but not yet urgent, that really builds our long-term capabilities and builds our well-being, right? So and if there's too much stuff that we don't like doing that we have to do, we have to examine it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it might be that you examine it and you go, yeah, I see why I've got to do it. And that can, because in terms of some other overarching high goal, it keeps pushing it up in terms of importance, right? Even though the task itself may not be enjoyable, you're going to do it because it's ticking your priorities, right? But that constant examination, I think, is what we have to do, especially given this modern time when there's so many demands on our attention. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a problem that doesn't go away, that one, Terry. But thinking clearly about it, that's the important thing. Yeah. Brilliant. Now, so we were going to go girl, boy. So that must mean you, Karen.
My turn. I don't so much have a question as just like really what resonated with me, because I feel like I'm in a constant state of distraction, whether it be work or home, especially moving to a work from home situation. You know, for my kids, it's like I'm accessible because I'm here. So it's trying to get into those deep work moments. And then I need to drive, or I need this. So what really resonated with me was the time blocking and the put downs, and just really creating those boundaries for myself, and how do I integrate that into my life. The other distractions, you know, with work, like we're all, you know, if you're working away and the Slack is open, the notifications you talked about, and it's just constant, you know, people needing your help or support on something. So just really being intentional. And I think that in a leadership role as well, leading by example of like, you know what, I'm not accessible for these next 2 hours because I'm focusing on getting this task completed, to nudge that ocean liner, that type of thing. So that's just really what resonated with me, and I think really, really helpful.
That's very interesting. There's a few jumping off points there, obviously. I might start with the one about, you know, when you do block some time off, and you implied there, I think, that there's also a function of that where you're role modeling that kind of behavior. And I think that's very important, that if our staff, you know, looking upwards, you know, and see our leaders who are really valuing their own attention, and to the extent that they're blocking time off and sending explicit signals to people, unless it's super urgent, don't interrupt me in this period. That then gives them permission to do their version of that, right? And over the years, in consulting in the corporate landscape, this issue is everywhere. Leaders everywhere in the world have this issue, and you know, talking to managers and leaders, you know, they can't get their job done when they're at work because they're just so many people at them all day long. You know, and so they come in earlier and stay later. Or I guess these days it's changed a bit though, because we now have the option of working from home, and that is quite useful in that way. But one intervention I found, and managers have found to be incredibly helpful, and it sort of jumps off that point about signalling that one is allowed to focus and concentrate, is actually to call a meeting of the team, and I call it making war on distraction. That's the agenda item, and it's just to say, look, our most valuable asset is our attention, and we often, you know, not on purpose, we're not conscious of doing this, but we're often distracting other people, and just when they were in. You know, it takes maybe 3 to 5 minutes to really get absorbed in something, and then someone, you know, in the best of will comes up and says, "How was your weekend?" You know, like, and of course we want to have those conversations, but we need to be much more mindful. And so the purpose of this meeting is for everyone to make suggestions about how they can honour each other's attention, and in particular, you know, when managers say, "Look, I get distracted probably 50 times a day. I'd be happy with 20. you know, can you help me get to that?" And what I found is that team members are really happy to contribute to that sort of project. You know, so they might go, should I go to him now or her now? Maybe I should take 5 questions at once rather than go to them 5 times. You know, that sort of just practical stuff. Now, what was the first thing you said, though? That was just talking off the tail of what was the first thing you said?
the time blocking and the
You said you were distracted. You
Yes.
noticed how often your mind was distracted.
constant state of distraction. It's actually something that's been coming up a lot for me lately. Like I'm trying to
Yeah.
focus in on one task, and I'm like, I like keep, because I feel like I'm being pulled. So that's where I was getting at, and that's where these concepts just really, really land and integrating them.
Yeah. So just a couple of thoughts on that. We can be in a distracted state of mind, right? So it's not necessarily that our work situation is any more distracting or not. You might notice that some days your mind is more focused, even though you may have the equivalent number of things that will want to draw your attention, right? So I guess that then leads to two types of strategies. One is about making the mind less distractible. That's one family of solutions. And the other family is using our planning methods, our to-do lists or the way we structure our calendars, using those, or even a notebook that you carry with you, which I tend to do. I carry little Post-its with me and a pen usually. And the idea is that you empty out of your mind things that are concerning you so that the mind doesn't have to keep remembering to do it, right? And there's a book called Getting Things Done, and I've forgotten the guy's name just off the top of my head, but the idea is that we've only got so much psychic RAM. RAM, this sort of working memory, and that and human beings, we worry about stuff until we do it, but we also worry that we're going to forget about it. So as soon as that comes to mind, you might even be lying in bed, like you get it out of the mind, you put it somewhere safe, external to the mind, and then the mind can relax again, knowing, there's a plan for it to be done. I know it can be done. Now I can focus on what I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Completely. It's physical act, actually, of getting it out of here, down here.
It's a very limited capacity processor. And if we're filling it up with things we're worried about, haven't quite nailed down external to the mind, then we're going to be in a constant state of distraction, right? And then on the other side, it's this, mindfulness practices are useful because they are basically training in non-distraction. And you build that mental muscle, you then apply it in every day. So in other words, I'm noticing now I'm distracted. Now, is there something on my mind that I need to take out of my mind, or do I just need to shift my attention back to where I am? Did you get that? Brilliant. That just leaves you, Chris. Not just, of course, that leaves you, Chris. What do you got for me?
Yeah, I don't have questions so much as maybe a couple observations.
Right.
Because this is also something that I've been thinking about just a lot, and how to and also as we grow and our careers evolve and change, the ways that distraction and deep work present themselves as opportunities and challenges can change as well. So it's sort of the strategies are constantly evolving or adapting based around the needs. But one of the things that has proven to be really, that I found myself in a spiral on, in prior years, was I would get mad at distractions. And so incorporating some equanimity into that process, where I was no longer mad at distractions, removed one layer right out of the gate that I would have to work my way through.
Yeah, brilliant.
Right. And then the second, which was on the last slide that you showed, was it's the sort of the 4 points of ways of criteria to think about our productivity. And it was are you doing your best work with the available time was one, the focused when working, happy on what you spend your time on, and the other one was rest. And what I've observed, at least for me personally, is that if I prioritize rest, often all three of those other things fall into place. And so just by focusing on that one variable, which was something that I had historically been very bad about, but by reshifting and focusing on that, all of a sudden, a lot of other things just started to line up by nature of me being better rested, right? Like my time was being better spent because it was, and my brain was better rested, better able to apply, and I was able to enjoy the work more because I was able to dedicate my mental resources in a better way. And so just interesting how like that one, those two variables or focusing on those things allowed a lot of the haze to kind of clear and a lot of the deep work kind of outcome to.
It's so interesting, isn't it? So we'll start with the second one, the resting, we're designed to modulate, as organic creatures, we can't just be on all the time. And our mental functioning, becomes much more efficient when we're rested. A bit like I was saying before, if we quieten the mind down, it brings all of its resources to bear on this object rather than dividing it amongst many. And rest is the same sort of function, as you say. I mean, if we're rested, we're much more likely to be happy, right? For just generally, right? So we have a thing called state-dependent cognition. That is the way our thinking flows from or depends on our physiological state. So if you're in pain and very agitated, the nature, the colour, the flavour of your thoughts are likely to reflect how your body's feeling, right? And conversely, if you're rested, you're much more likely to have positive thoughts, right? The importance of the body in all of this, and this is another thing that Stephen Covey spoke about taking care of the body, that goes into quadrant 2. It builds your capability long term, right? The second point, your second insight, is a fantastic one. The one about being upset about being distracted. And, it's kind of like a meta level, isn't it? That for me sits, it's a bit like Terry's discussion. That sort of sits at this sort of level of mindfulness that you go, oh, look, I'm noticing this tension within me. That's very different to just identifying with the tension and being the tension, right? And once we notice that as a tension, then you can sort of go, well, I can make decisions now. I can make a choice. It's a bit like being in traffic and getting upset at another driver and not being that conscious of it. And you could spend a long time, especially if you're in a traffic jam, being upset at that driver 2 cars up, Or you can go, oh, hang on, clunk. I'm wasting my life here by being upset at something, and this is not adding any good to my existence. Yep. And then you can drop the upset. Right. So this is like a psychological strategy. Terrific. Well, as usual, you guys not only did not disappoint, I think you have exceeded my expectations. One of the things I love about these Q&As is that you guys see things in what I say that I hadn't thought of. You endow me with insights and intelligence that I don't have, and I think that's wonderful. And we're going to meet again soon to look at the third podcast in this series, which is much more focused around using work for flourishing. So I look forward to when we get together to do that. But for now, thanks, guys. I'll see you soon.